Oh, another day of horror watching. So, we're on day 4 of this countdown. I wonder what today's watch is going to be. Well, it seems like with this watch, it's telling me that something strange is happening deep in the woods, but no one apparently seems to have lived to tell about it in this world.
Drop on by the Clown Cafe. Drop on by the Clown Cafe. The grub is downright gruesome, but your appetite's obey. 'Cause food's a little funny, food's a little funny, food's a little funny at the Clown Cafe. Drop on by the Clown Cafe, your favorite meals on wheels. The menu is disgusting and it's full of special deals. Nothing here is good for you, so grab yourself a tray. 'Cause food's a little funny at the Clown Cafe. Drop on by the Clown Cafe. Drop on by the Clown Cafe. Gobble up your order quick before it runs away. 'Cause food's a little funny at the Clown Cafe. Why not visit after school and have yourselves a bite? An appetizing appetizer certain to delight. We haven't done it right unless it makes your teeth decay. 'Cause food's a little funny at the Clown Cafe. Drop on by the Clown Cafe. Drop on by the Clown Cafe. The grub is downright gruesome, but your appetites obey. 'Cause food's a little funny, food's a little funny, food's a little funny at the Clown Cafe.
Hey everyone, it's Don G. Corleone here, and I'm here with episode 4 of Halloween Horror Movie Review Season 4. And this episode is going to be for a horror film from 2003. And this is our first review for this season for a horror film that's not in the 80s or 90s, but in the 2000s. And it's going to be for, believe it or not, a cannibal film set in the woods. And much like the last episode, this one is going to be for another film that spawned a whole bunch of direct-to-DVD sequels. About almost the same number as Tremors, nearly. I think so anyways. I think it spawned about 5 sequels and a reboot. This one is going to be for 2003's Wrong Turn. How does the plot of Wrong Turn go? Well, Chris Flynn is driving his car for a job interview in another city. However, an accident with a truck transporting chemical products blocks the highway, and Chris looks for an alternative route through the mountains of West Virginia to accomplish his schedule. But due to the lack of attention, he crashes another car parked in the middle of the road with flat tires. Then Chris meets a group of 5 friends who intended to camp in the forest, and they decide to leave the couple Francine and Evan on the place. While Chris, Jesse, Carly, and her fiancé Scott try to find some help, they find this weird cabin in the middle of nowhere where 3 violent cannibalistic mountain men with the appearance of monsters live. And then so the 2 couples now have to try to escape from the mountain men while chased by them. Yeah, so how was this film made? Well, development for the film began in 2001 when it is now Summit Entertainment and Newmarket Group learned to produce Wrong Turn, which would be a 70s-styled horror pick to be directed by Rob Schmidt. Alan McElroy wrote the script, and the movie was a co-production. Summit Entertainment and Constant Films, with Stan Winston designing the creature effects and serving as a producer. And inking a deal with Fox-based Regency Enterprises, the co-financers of Wrong Turn secured domestic distribution through Fox. Fox reportedly had trouble securing an R rating from the MPAA due to the film's intense violence, with many of the TV spots for the film also refused approval, and it was possibly one of the reasons why the Wrong Turn movies were rest of the Wrong Turn movies were released straight to video. With the exception of this. Because this still went to theaters. And it's because it did, after the film was shot and marketed, Wrong Turn was theatrically released in the United States on May 30th, 2003. That's ironically the same release date as Finding Nemo by 20th Century Fox. And the film received about mixed reviews from critics. They praised its premise, but they also criticized the script, the underdeveloped characters, and the multiple horror cliches in this movie. And it grossed over in $28 million worldwide on a $12 million budget. So, there's that. And as for my reaction to this movie, well, this was also a first-time watch for me, much like Tremors was. And the previous episodes were. I bought this and Wrong Turn 2 on DVD last year, but I never got around to watching them. So I decided that this movie would be part of Halloween Horror Movie Review Season 4. Now I've been familiar with this series and I heard just about most of the sequels suck, with apparently the most violent, horrendous of the series being considered Wrong Turn 5 Bloodlines. I have watched rants on Wrong Turn 5 Bloodlines and it definitely looks horrible. I've seen clips of Wrong Turn 5 and I've seen the ending scene of Wrong Turn 5 and yeah, it's enough to already make me hate the movie regardless. But this review's for the first movie that started this whole franchise, the one that's good. Watched this movie yesterday, and it was enjoyable. Not great or anything, but enjoyable at best. And obviously he's going to end up being the best of the series. It does almost feel a bit too much like the concept of the Hills of Eyes a lot of times. It's used being killed by one. The killer in the woods, stalk and slash mutated cannibals. It's all been done 100 times before. But not always as effectively and brutally as Wrong Turn. It's all in the execution, folks, quite literally. This was released at the start of 2003's big horror boom. Wrong Turn pretty much kind of came and went seemingly unnoticed. The theaters were impacted and the movie developed an early cult following, much like some of its predecessors, in which the makers of Wrong Turn never denied trying to mimic. People liked this movie. Some people did like this movie while critics weren't so. And I ended up being one of those people after just watching this film for the first time. Like another horror film, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this film makes you believe that this could actually happen in real life. The cannibals in this film are ugly and nasty. I could definitely not imagine the smell they gave off if I were there. These cannibals are good at what they do, and the film showed this beautifully when our college kids come upon their home and later their backyard, if you want to call it that. When it comes to the acting and dialogue of Wrong Turn, the acting and dialogue is okay, and has some cheesy, stupid stuff throughout the story, but horror films aren't really known for these deaths, so it doesn't matter. I felt the film held back in a few places, but in the end, it didn't matter. I enjoyed it, and the film doesn't really get boring at all. The film is gory in some scenes, and there's a few intense scenes, which definitely will make you want to look away the other way somewhat, but this is a horror film. Like, come on. So how does this flick match up to films like The Hills Have Eyes and The Texas Chainsaw Massacre storyline-wise? On his way to the woods, a guy's car is sabotaged by a creatively placed booby trap, and now Chris and his group of teenagers who are wrecked just ahead of him, which include Jesse, Carly, and Scott, they're lost looking for help, they get more lost, and they get stalked by a group of cannibalistic, wild-deformed, and brave mountain men all the while. And it doesn't get any better than this, folks. Some obviously don't make it out of this movie alive, as if you probably couldn't figure that out. And the look and feel, when it comes to the look of the film, the look and feel of the film is great. The mountain men are rather creepy looking and look familiar. Sorry guys. The cast plays their roles really well for this type of film, and once this movie gets intense, it keeps that pace throughout much. I didn't expect this film to be as fun as it was. And yeah, so pretty much our protagonist is Chris Flynn, and he's this doctor. He's on his way to an appointment across the other side of the country. But then a chemical spill and crash on the freeway means 2 hours of waiting traffic and being late and probably not getting the position. So he's keen to avoid this, and he takes a dirt road along Bear Mountain, hoping to cut back onto the freeway some miles ahead of the jam. But I bet he wishes he couldn't, though. Because he makes a wrong turn that causes him to smash into an already wasted people carrier. and it's driven by mountain bikers who had their tires shredded by barbed wire laying by apparent hillbillies. So Chris and these other guys try to walk to the nearest phone, but a moronic and deserving to die boyfriend and girlfriend, who are played by Kevin Zegers and Lindy Booth, they stay behind to guard the cars. And and know how predictable it goes. That couple doesn't last very long. And the only dwelling the quarters stumble upon is the disgusting house of a bunch of ferocious, cannibalistic mountain men. Their house gets filled with stolen belongings of people they've already killed. No one picks this up until the men suddenly return. And it's kind of clear from the onset who's going to live and who's going to die. Chris is strong-willed and level-headed and responds to tense situations with logic and cunning. Most of the others do stupid things and do all but paint a bullseye on their forehead. So, obviously Chris won't die because he's the most smart. So why would he die? It's too inevitable that there's no signal, there's no gas, there's no station for miles, so some of them inevitably just start walking. It's too inevitable that some will stay put and wind up getting hacked to bits by the deranged lunatics who play by their own rules. And their own rules involve jumping, screaming, running around senselessly, and shooting anything that moves. And one will say that Wrong Turn is just simple horror fluff, resurrected on every horror cliche. In a way, they're not wrong. The film has more going for it than a lot of other modern pieces. This was made in 2003, and the 70s style of horror seemed dead, and films didn't want to go back to the past to see what made films like Hills Have Eyes and Texas Chainsaw Massacre special. Director Rob Schmidt did that. He went back and followed the blueprint once used by classic 70s horror. The turnout doesn't involve any audience winks, pointless sex scenes, or implausible irony, yeah. Despite these guys being cannibals, there are surprisingly no gross sex or rape scenes in this. So that's actually refreshing. As much as I love the Hills Have Eyes remake, the rape stuff in that was a bad quality for me. The rape scene in Hills Have Eyes was one of my biggest bad qualities with that film. And they made more rape scenes for the Hills of Ice 2, the 2007 movie. So, but I liked how, and I heard the sequels go worse with that for Wrong Turn, but the Wrong Turn 1, there's like no sex scenes of any kind. Or implausible irony. It's sophisticated and sometimes even wholly creepy. I think the main reason for its creepy vibe is the fact that the film knows the importance of suspense and atmosphere. It gives a pretty decent build-up before the inevitable kill, and the delightful unease of the woodsy setting is utilized very well. Kind of similar to how Eli Roth evoked atmosphere and setting to tell a story in Cabin Fever. But the thing with Cabin Fever was the payoff was a little loose and short. Here, Wrong Turn doesn't stop at look, and it tries to go the extra mile. If anything, the film is entertaining. It's short, it's dark, it's entertaining, and it's interesting. It's too bad the film didn't want to go for the full look of a 70s picture, by adding film grain and dirt to the lens to give the appearance of a cheap grindhouse film. They can definitely see that intensifying the whole experience and making it scarier than it currently is. As it stands, Wrong Turn is tolerable horror fare and brutally honest map quest motivation. The good thing about Wrong Turn is, it never gets boring. Usually I've seen many similar horror films. I do definitely prefer a movie with an original storyline. At times, it's just entertaining to see an average story worked out well enough without any real pretensions. There's a pleasant, creepy tension that goes on throughout the film. And I'll be glued to the screen the whole time. It's not a movie in which people get slaughtered non-stop. Even though certainly some people do get killed off, obviously. But what you have is a constant threat that they might get slaughtered any second. Do the characters have much depth? No, not really. We see nothing more than the same hints about their lives. But again, does it matter? Nah. As long as I'm entertained enough, I can forgive the writers for this one. The actors do a good job in being believable. I do find that important. Eliza Dushku plays her part well as this no bullshit young woman. And though at times Desmond Harrington did a fine job too. And he and Eliza had good chemistry going on. And I do like... and Chris and... yeah, the two leads, like Desmond Harrington and Eliza, easily give the best performances. And I think Chris is a good protagonist. easily. I like that he's not some obnoxious asshole. He's actually willing to help the gang, and none of the bikers are rude to him at all. I like that none of the teenagers were assholes, and hardly anyone was unlikable. Just about everybody was decently likable here, and all willing to work together and not try to split up. They actually acknowledge that they clearly know that splitting up will just get them killed, so they don't split up at all. So I really like that about these characters. They may not be the best characters, but they thankfully weren't assholes. And they thankfully were actually tolerable characters. The rest of the cast was pretty good too. Like Desmond Harrington and Liza Dushku especially, they both put forth really solid performances and even helped to make up for some of the movie's shortfalls. Carly's character was just nothing short of brutal. Like, for me, that's kind of what sets some of the other road trip horrors apart from this. The whiny, sulky brunette just did little more than whine and complain, and even held the rest back when they were fleeing the cannibals. And I wish that part of the script could have changed and eliminated some of her lines or just replaced the actress altogether. So I really wish Carly was the first one to bite the biscuit, not the other guy that was with them. The guy that got shot by the 3 arrows. I would have rather that happened instead. Just kill off the most annoying one first. Because I don't think the other guy should have died. The other guy, I do kind of wish the rest of them lived, just only that girl and the idiot couple died instead. That's what I wish could have happened. There are other movies that this reminds me of due to the nature of the plot, which is the Hills of Eyes films, The Hitcher, Wolf Creek, Cabin Fever. The only mistake the director made was with the cannibals laughing so much. Like, it's kind of hard to accept this as a good horror because the cannibals sound like a bunch of drunken retards on and off throughout the movie. And from the opening scene of the desperate hiker to the very end, Wrong Turn is like the line of a graphic equalizer. High peaks, lows, and off-course of balance. One can argue the balance is sometimes predictable and original, lacks suspense. But on the other hand, the highs lift the lows of the balance on the movie into 80-something. Minutes of a stable, entertaining horror flick, not to mention the performances of the leading actors and stuff, and once the characters all meet, oh boy, the meeting isn't your standard office meeting. Then the next 20 minutes or so concentrates on introduction of the characters, and of course, a brief glimpse of the ever-so-frightening trio of physically retarded maniacs. Again, the sequence of events is predictable. The bear trap scene is quite the opposite. But definitely the most interesting part of the movie, where the equalizer level is set as high, happens when the 4 suspecting adventurers stumble across the cabin, and they decide to enter it in the hope of finding a phone, and each of the 4 travels into various rooms with each individual discovering unique objects. And all of a sudden they hear the roaring edge of a load truck approaching the house. They rush across to see what the drama is. And they see this tow truck and they catch a glimpse of the trio. And the panic sinks in, striking the chords of each person's own fear. Now the 4 are unable to escape, opting to hide in pairs in 2 parts of the house. And it seems really well as they try to... This scene's done really well even as they try to leave the house without waking up the cannibals. But just as they finally are about to exit the house, one cannibal has his eyes open, staring at them, and then of course Chris just quickly darts off. And of course the cannibals then get in their tow truck, and it turns out the cannibals saw them and are now hunting them down. By the time they get to the junkyard pile, because the tow truck eventually also arrives at the junkyard pile just as they do. The reason why I decently liked this film, because I thought it was pulled off well. The filmmakers just get right to the point. There ain't a whole lot of character development, so senseless killing can begin. The frights are genuine. And I really hope for the narrow escapes of our heroes throughout the movie, that bad guys are sufficiently creepy, with reasonably realistic makeup and believable portrayals of crazy inbreds. And the other actors did a pretty good job as well. I thought that Desmond Harrington was definitely a great lead. He had a very strong, serious presence. Not like this other most B-movie actors at all. In fact, all the actors I think just did fairly well. Jeremy Sisto's dry performance as a newly edged Scott was terrific. You know, it was brief. Emmanuel Sharik, though, was definitely the most annoying of the bunch and should have died first. Because all she did was whine and just stop running because he died. Look, And Eliza just goes like, "We gotta go, or he'll just have died for nothing. We have to keep going." Could her character just be the first to die instead of Jeremy Sistos? Would have been better. And Eliza Dushko also turned out to be a pretty great character, because at least she wasn't annoying. She wasn't all bitchy and stuff. They didn't make her that. So I like that right there. The only really annoying one of the whole main leads was Emmanuel Sharik's character. And the locations do look absolutely stunning here, and they've been chosen well with care. And the movie includes some scary moments like when the lead characters are hiding in the cabin of the cannibals. The scene involving the watchtower is definitely quite intense. It's certainly the most memorable one from the entire film. And the final scene also leaves a gripping impact. But when it comes to the kills in the movie, the opening kill is definitely pretty gnarly. It's probably the most gnarly kill of the movie with the hiker, where the hiker lady falls and just bashes her head on the rocks. Right there, not like super gory, but pretty gnarly kill right there. Easily the best kill of the movie. Other best kill is when Jeremy's character gets shot with 3 arrows. Stuff at 3 crossbow arrows by the cannibals. And I do love the finale of this movie, even if the finale was a bit studio interfered, which I'm going to get to in a bit. How the finale goes is Chris pulls a branch while Jesse lures the attacker to the former to release it, knocking him down. So Jesse and Chris flee and hide in a cave until morning, but the cannibals find them, they push Chris down the hill, and they kidnap Jesse and take her back to their cabin. Chris survives the fall and he meets a police officer, but the officer gets killed by Sawtooth before Chris can even warn him. He shoots him in the eye with an arrow. And Chris hitches a ride by holding off the underside of the truck as Sawtooth drives it back to the cabin, where Jesse has been tied down in bed in preparation to be eaten, and she watches fearfully as the cannibals chop up the dead policeman. But just as the cannibals move on to Jesse, and this is probably Chris's best moment of this movie, Chris shows up, he sets the building on fire, he drives the truck through the fucker's wall, and he fights off the 3 fuckers, and he frees Jesse. They escape as Chris kills the cannibals, blowing up the cabin wall. Technically, Chris does put up a fight with one of the cannibals, but one of the cannibals gains the upper hand. But then, of course, Jesse, instead of cowardly fleeing from the whole scene and just bailing on Chris, she actually saves Chris' life and stabs the fucker clean in the back. Right there. So I like that Jesse still saved Chris and she didn't just take off the minute Chris saved her. So I like that these two work together to defeat the fuckers, the ugly pieces of shit. Then, of course, after Chris and Jesse fight off the cannibals, Chris then blows up the cabin and kills them. Just sets the damn thing on fire. So I like that. So I really like Chris in that moment, just blowing up the cabin. And then the pair just steal the cannibals' pickup truck, and they drive out of the forest. And then in the beginning of the movie, Chris stumbled upon this guy named Maynard at his gas station to try to use his payphone, but the payphone didn't work, so he was forced to keep going. So they go back to Maynard's gas station nearby, and Maynard goes in to hide in his gas station, and when it seems like Chris and Jesse are there to get the revenge on Maynard for getting them lost in this whole situation, Chris just takes the map before he and Jesse leave. But to be honest, guys, I kind of wish they did kill Maynard. They honestly should have went in there and they should have snapped Maynard's neck. I wish Chris could have did that. Because Maynard technically got them in this whole situation to begin with, and apparently if you know of Wrong Turn 4 and 5, maybe it should have been better that Maynard died if you are familiar with Wrong Turn 4 and 5 and his roles in those. But Chris takes the map and he and Jesse leave and the film's over. But it's not over yet. Because in the mid-credit scene, A deputy sheriff had apparently received a radio call earlier, investigates the remains of the destroyed cabin, but then three-figure emerges alive, apparently survived the explosion. He rises and kills the deputy. And get this, guys. Rob Schmidt didn't even direct the mid-credits scene. The studio went against his back and they directed that themselves. Rob Schmidt just wanted it to end with Chris and Jesse fleeing and there'd be no sequel setups. He just wanted Wrong Turn to be this one-and-done horror film, and that was it. He wanted the cannibals to stay dead. There was never going to be any sequels. He never intended Wrong Turn to be a franchise. But the studio was... It's the same thing that happened with Nightmare on Elm Street. Wes Craven wanted it to end with Freddy defeated and no sequels, but New Line Cinema was like, no, we need a franchise out of this. Elm Street, so Wes Craven had to go make a downer ending for the first film. But now Elm Street 3, Elm Street 4, Elm Street 2, New Nightmare, and Freddy vs. Jason were fine sequels, but 5 and 6 were definitely not. The same can almost be said about Wrong Turn, except the only sequel anybody seems to really like is the first film. There are some that are fine with Wrong Turn 4. There's some people that think Wrong Turn 4 is decent, but even Wrong Turn 4 is also hated. But it has some people that think it's fine. The only sequel anybody liked was Wrong Turn 2, but Rob Schmidt was actually even angry at the studio for making a post-credits scene and trying to make Wrong Turn a franchise without his consent. He never wanted Wrong Turn to be a franchise. It was just going to be this simple, one-and-done cannibal horror film. There was no reason to make any sequels. He wanted the cannibals to actually be dead after this film. So that brings us to the bad qualities. And there are the reasons why I think the movie's just enjoyable. Because most obviously, the plot's the same as most horror films set in the woods. So there's nothing really new to expect here. And the movie needed some time to get you on the edge of your seat. The opening half hour or so could have been cut by at least 10 minutes to make this film even more intense. And the characters aren't even particularly fleshed out, as the pot-smoking couple remains superficial, and our romantic couple simply behaves in the silliest way, and they do get annoying at times, but not super obnoxious like a lot of horror films like this are. And the plot is filled with horror movie tropes and is quite predictable. And like I mentioned, the cannibals in this movie laughed way too much and it got annoying. Like seriously, could these cannibals just learn to shut up every once in a while? Not even ones in The Hills Have Eyes laugh so damn much. It's really too bad that this movie wasn't really promoted more as well, so they could have been up there with the likes of Scream, maybe not completely up to par as such, but many more people would have gotten an awesome scare out of this movie. And the acting and dialogue is okay and has some cheesy, stupid stuff throughout the story, but horror films aren't really known for these deaths, so it doesn't matter. I felt the film held back in a few places, but in the end it didn't matter. Like, I enjoyed it. The film doesn't get boring at all. It's gory in some scenes. There are a few intense scenes. And there's a variety of things in this movie that do make me chuckle and really look away from its believability. Like when the kids find the cannibals to creep shack in the woods, one of the girls insists she needs to go to the bathroom. Like, seriously? No one in their right mind would want to use the bathroom in this kind of place. Or when they're climbing around the trees trying to escape the cannibals, it's quite an original and exciting sequence, but it wasn't believable because you can't just go walking over limbs from tree to tree, high up in the forest canopy. And they're not laid out like a scaffolding or something. And they even got a kick out of how stupid our college kids were in comparison to their inbreed foes. And at one point, they wanted to steal the cannibal's truck, so they come up with this ridiculous plan for one of them to distract them while the others get the truck. But it's pretty obvious they could have all just snuck through the woods instead. At another point in the film, they climb to this high range tower, proceed to light a couple of light sticks. And of course, it's just getting dark and a light is visible through the window of the tower. And it shines like a beacon in any man-eating mountain man within 5 miles. So those are kind of the more annoying parts of the film. So yeah, all in all, Wrong Turn has some problems, but it's still an enjoyable good time for a watch. In the end, I would definitely stream Wrong Turn if you like gory forest horror films, or just go watch the 2006 remix of The Hills Have Eyes for a better cannibal horror film, but this is still worth a watch nonetheless. Anyways, that's it for my view of Wrong Turn. If you're wondering how I'm going to rate Wrong Turn, here's how I'm going to rate this movie. Overall, if you are a fan of forced horror films involving cannibals, especially ones from the 2000s, then totally stream this one online because of the bad quality as I mentioned. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rate Wrong Turn, I'm going to give Wrong Turn a 7 out of 10. There we go. That wraps up my review for Wrong Turn. So, you're wondering, what's the next episode going to be? Well, the next episode is going to be for a film you saw me recently do a rant commentary on. And you know this one, I did a rant commentary of me watching the film, but it's also time for me to do an actual rant on this film. And this is for one that was requested by DJ Disney. No offense to this guy. Definitely another great user. And I was definitely going to take this guy's idea, and I needed ideas for this season. But I need to have some rants for this season too. I need to have some bad movies for this season, or can't just review good movies all the time. It's not, then it wouldn't be that interesting. But this was for a 2000s found footage horror film that kind of started the death of horror for me. And it's another overhyped film. And how it goes is, it's a couple sleeping for a whole hour and 26 minutes. Yes, Paranormal Activity is the next episode. And that's definitely going to be a rant. But until then, guys, that'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching. If you like this, want to see more, then don't forget to like, subscribe to Don G. Corleone.